Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join our webinar today on fostering innovation within the federal space. My name is Ruthie Senanayaka, and I run all of the events at Blueprint, and I am so excited to introduce our team to you and get things started. First of all, thank you for joining wherever you're joining from. We are currently live on Facebook and LinkedIn. And so wherever you're joining from, we really appreciate you joining. If you are not aware of what Blueprint Technologies is, we are a technology solutions company, and we focus on strategy and implementation, delivery, and execution. So we're gonna have our team members go through that way more in depth, but that is just an overall view of what we do. So just quick housekeeping tips. If you have any questions at all throughout the entire session, feel free to add them to the Q&A section. All you have to do is just hover your mouse over the main screen and the Q&A box will pop up at the bottom. Click on that and add your question in, and we'll make sure to get that answered toward the end of the session. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, maybe not in the Q&A section, but later on, our email address is info@bpcs.com, or you can look at our website online, and that is bpcs.com. So without further ado, I want to introduce our team that we have. So first, I'm going to ask Gary. Gary, can you give us a quick introduction about yourself, what you do at Blueprint, and how you got into talking about the federal space?
Yeah, so Gary Nakanalua, I am the Managing Director of Innovation here at Blueprint. So among other things, I run our innovation lab. Before getting into the commercial space, I actually was in the federal space, was in the Army for a number of years, and then moved on working for Camber Corporation, and then later Lockheed Martin, and then moved into the commercial space.
Awesome, thank you. And next I'll pass it over to Xavier.
Good morning, Ruthie, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on our webinar today. My name is Xavier Peterson. I've been with Blueprint just over a year. I focus primarily in the client development division of the federal sector with another peer who you'll be meeting shortly. Background is former Air Force. Have a propensity to like to travel, and I've had a number of things that I wanted to talk to you about, so I'm excited to get this webinar started.
Excellent, thank you. And without further ado, Ivan.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Ivan Eno. I'm also with Xavier in the client development space. In my previous life, I was in the Army, just like Gary was. And when I got out, I served a number of roles in the client-facing sector. Over the last 6 years, I've been in the federal space, really serving in the DoD, a number of other federal agencies, transitioned to Blueprint at the start of this year, and I'm helping them in the transition their services and their products to serving the federal market. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome, thanks so much. So I'll have you guys go ahead and get started with your content, and just a quick reminder to everyone, if you have any questions for our awesome panelists, just feel free to add that into the Q&A section.
Awesome. Thanks, Ruthie. So I'll start things off. Ruthie gave a brief introduction on Blueprint and what it does, and I'll just spend a couple minutes highlighting the areas that we think are most applicable to the federal space. I think if you break down what Blueprint does, it's kind of two broad categories. One is innovation, and Gary's going to go into a lot more detail on that in a later segment of the webinar. And then the second is sort of our data services. And if you think about data services, Blueprint is involved in helping our clients along the full spectrum of that, whether it's developing a modern data architecture at the back end with modern data estate, whether it's leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to take that data and really make sure you're understanding everything that it can provide, you're getting the most information out of it, you're achieving synergy through previously siloed data sources. And then at the very front end, it's developing that modern, user-friendly UI and UX that is mobile-friendly, that all of your different users, regardless of their time zones, their languages can tap into and really execute on quickly and efficiently. So those two buckets, really anything related to data, we love to be involved in, and then anything where we're trying to help our customers build something new to solve a problem that they have, whether it's leveraging cost solutions or whether it's complete from scratch coding. Those are really the key areas.
You know, Ivan, I'll just add, one of the reasons that we actually started this division that you and I are in is the decision at the leadership level of Blueprint about a year ago, when they started to say, what should we even be thinking about getting into the federal sector? And there's a couple of things that come to mind. For one, the science and technology arm of the U.S. Special Operations Command recently put out an article talking about how they're investing in edge computing to secure data and other new technologies that it expects will shape the future for warfighting against near-peer adversaries. And what you and I talk about all the time is how that translates easily to China and Russia. Once you get past that, the real reason that Blueprint started this division specifically aimed at the federal space is the government wants to bring intelligence to solutions and systems throughout the DoD. And we, along with our partners, who some of are actually on the call today, want to be a partner of choice to deliver that intelligence. As we continue to talk about the components of DoD and how they translate to federal contracting and awarding contracts, they're trying to unlock emerging capabilities and they just don't know how sometimes. But AI and new communication technologies will define the coming decades of war. And I think while we're divesting the old way when you and I were in the military, Gary and Ivan, where it was about Hummers and trucks and airplanes, those days are gone. Right now, it's technology. And if you're not securing your data, you're going to lose the war, so to speak. So I'm really excited to talk about how we have really navigated the waters of shifting from the commercial mindset only to more of the federal opportunities that are available to us. And we believe that the military is seeking to bring intelligence in every system and solution for years to come versus purchasing, like I said, that same old thing that you and I were stuck in the fields with for years. And I think the second phase for us, as we look at how we're actually going to approach going into the federal space, is just making sure that the reason that some of the people are actually on this call, whether it be some of our partners or some of our teaming partners, is understanding that we can't do this alone either. And what we're doing now is we're leveraging those partnerships, looking for small businesses, looking for veteran-owned firms to work with, because a lot of the solicitation opportunities are still a little bit archaic. And so they still award the bids and the processes the exact same way they did 20, 30 years ago. And I think what Blueprint does is in those solicitation opportunities where that small business comes to mind and they just don't have that bandwidth to even understand what the data does, they bring companies like Blueprint in. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
That's awesome. Thanks, X. So what I'll do right now is I'll share my screen and I'll just go kind of a little bit more into detail on why we're getting into this space in the first place, and sort of the trend that we've seen over the past couple of years. So like I talked about, Blueprint has really grown leaps and bounds over the last 6-7 years in the commercial space. And we've been getting pulled into the federal space by our partners. Our large integration partners, we've been getting pulled in by the COTS providers of some really leading and cutting edge tools that have been wildly successful in the commercial space, and they're pulling us into the federal space. And I think the real genesis for this has been a gap that's developed over the last 5 or 6 years between the success in the commercial market in adopting new technologies and new processes and the federal market and lagging behind that. And I think that because of that gap, the federal market is really starting to develop requirements that are saying, hey, help us bridge this. So what we've got on the screen right here is just the Better Buying Power 3.0. This is just broad DoD guidance. And really what they're saying, we want to highlight here, they're saying, we understand that a lot of innovation over the past came from these different areas, these R&D by the government labs, these nonprofit research institutions, these defense companies. That's still happening. But they're saying, we've also missed this innovation that was driven by the commercial market, widely adopted in the commercial market. And that's these, push to the cloud. If you're saying, how come the DoD is lagged behind in this push to the cloud? Why are we still dealing with every agency having dozens of siloed data sources when you look at the large Fortune 100 companies, and they've already successfully started to solve that problem. So I think the reason that commercial companies like ours are getting pulled into the federal space is saying, leverage some of our best practices, leverage some of those lessons learned, reduce the friction points in our projects, help us get there quicker with less risk and lower overall cost. And I think that's sort of a general theme that we're seeing across not only DoD agencies, but other federal agencies as well.
Well, the business argument is pretty straightforward. The federal government spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and they want to spend less with private sector companies. They're still the largest customer in the US. So as we look to get into this space, there's no reason for us not to get into this space. And that's why I'm really excited about what our leadership team decided to do last year. When you ask the question, why would Blueprint, who's already doing well, start even looking at this sector? This is the largest customer in the country and arguably the world. So why wouldn't we be in this space if we really want to make an imprint? I'm interested in hearing what you got to think about this, Gary. That's come on.
Yeah. So I have the benefit for Blueprint for my department and in general as a company. What we've always looked to do is look at how or where the world will be 3 to 5 years from now, and how do we start putting enterprises on a path today to get there. And to kind of illustrate some of that, I always believe that showing is better than telling. So I'll share we've done so much experimentation and R&D in the innovation lab over the years. So I wanted just to pick out a few that kind of highlight kind of the evolution and our path as we got here. And so first thing I'll show you all, and all of this, and I'm going to show you, is all available online. So that's another reason why I'm sharing it this way. So this first one was, when we're looking at the future, it's also part of evaluating the tech itself and how it might be applied essentially to improve and do things differently within the enterprise. And so some people will label these future-facing technologies, whether it's edge or deep technology, whatever the case may be, there's a whole slew of them. And so one of them, for example, is on the augmented reality, mixed reality side of the house. We were experimenting with taking all of this different data from the enterprise in a retail environment. And how do we sort of improve managers' understanding of how their employees are interacting and acting on a day-to-day basis. And so we put together this experiment where we took together all this data and we visualized it inside of the HoloLens. And so here, taking in all this data from all these different places, and what we're doing is we're combining it with other tech to everything from machine learning and just doing everything from sentiment analysis and things like this. And then we started working through the visualization inside of the HoloLens itself. So that's a screenshot here. This is just a look at Power BI inside of HoloLens. And then we started crafting a different experience. I even touched on this briefly. And so it came down to culminating in being able to determine an individual's sort of happiness score. So here you're looking at, this is actually during another experiment that we were running where we recreated a coffee shop experience. But here, based on everything that's going on, everything behind the scenes, Susie in this picture, she's actually quite happy. It's 4.5 out of 5. And this is being viewed through the HoloLens. So we imagined, managers and supervisors being able to walk around just getting a really quick gauge of how their employees' happiness levels are. Now that was 3 years ago. You fast forward to today. As a matter of fact, Microsoft Build is going on right now. We've been working with them on a project where we take telemetry data from Office 365, and we created this project staffing application. This is actually going to be open sourced. And what it does, it takes all of this data and allows an organization to get a better understanding of what the skills of their employees are without the employees actually having to fill out a profile. So by virtue of simply them doing their day-to-day, an organization gets a better overall holistic view of the employees themselves. And so that's really, really, really cool. Now, earlier I talked about, the sort of different types of tech and things like that. Another one that's very near and dear to my heart is drones. And so when years ago we were evaluating the use of drones for the oil field of the future for use in the oil and gas industry. And so as we were laying all these different things out, one of the things we wanted to experiment with is, the use of drones in that industry is not new, but it's also very expensive. So there are drone packages that, hundreds of thousands of dollars that got, just all types of amazing sensors and packages on them. But for these customers, some of them had, oil rigs and a presence spread out all over the place. And it wasn't financially feasible for them to leverage these hyper expensive drones for use at all these different locations. And another thing that drove us was a lot of this equipment, it already is IoT enabled. Anywhere between 70 to 80% of a rig is set up for IoT, but what about the other 20%? And so we wanted to see if we could, just leveraging video and audio, if we could actually start to determine anomalies happening within equipment. And so as we started experimenting with this, there were actually other technical issues that we were coming around, such as autonomous flight. And so a few years ago, after having kind of worked through the entire end-to-end autonomous drone flight, we presented at Spark Summit. And so here, I'm just going to kind of click through it real quick. But what we wanted to do right here, I'll play this. So this is a look inside of our innovation lab where we took a commercial off-the-shelf drone and enabled it for autonomous flight. And there you see the anomaly detection that is going on. That one was a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, this was our first AKA prototype that we used in that experiment. And this poor thing got crashed hundreds of times in the midst of trying to figure out autonomous flight from just this off-the-shelf commercial drone. Now, based upon our use of video and things we learned from that, we got approached by the retail industry. How could we leverage existing camera infrastructure that they may have? Maybe it's for loss prevention or whatever the case may be. How could that be leveraged to help improve customer experience in the store? And so we created a solution called Reflect, and that's what you're looking at here. So this is for one of our initial customers of Reflect. And what you're looking at is this is actual footage from the store, and you start noticing that it's identifying visitors as they are coming in, and it's maintaining that visitor count without the need for any other equipment. It's simply leveraging their existing camera hardware. And then we take it a step further. Here you can see we start looking at how the employee engages with the customer and start managing and watching the amount of time that employee interacts with the customer. And the reason this was so important is because this particular company realized that there was specific time frames that the longer they spent, or there was an optimal time that they should be interacting with the customer. This is kind of a bad example here because this customer knew exactly what they were looking for, came in and got out and things like that. So that was a lot of fun to kind of start really working through leveraging existing infrastructure and do new and interesting things with it. And then based upon this, we got approached by one of our partners to present at Microsoft Ignite for Gov a few years ago. So we took this same solution and we adjusted it around a lost property scenario. And so what we did is, this is the exact demo that we gave at Gov. And so I'll just kind of zip through this really quick. But here, basically, we're adding data sources or camera feeds rather, and then we're actually selecting a missing item. And then it runs through Reflect. And once it completes its search across all the different video assets that it has access to, it is able to determine the last location that it found that object. And we didn't do it through facial recognition. We actually did it through correlating different objects, because facial recognition can get a little creepy for some people. So here you can see we've identified the object that was missing and then associated and correlated that with other objects around it. And then it continues to track it along the way. So across all the different video feeds that it has access to, it starts coming back. And then eventually what it'll do is it'll send a notification and say, hey, I last seen this object at this location. So that was really, really fun to put together and showcase. And then as a result of our experience at Ignite, we started to learn that the way the federal government looks at digital transformation, very similar in some ways to the commercial space. There you go. So I actually want to speak a little bit around just kind of, your experience around working around the federal space and observations about what you've seen about how, industry and federal are different.
Sure, Gary. I'll start with, I got out of the Air Force in the late 80s, and then I moved overseas. So my first experience in the federal space was actually working on a government contract in the U.S. Army Kwajalein Atoll in the South Pacific, also known as the Marshall Islands. So that essentially, if you go back to the late 80s, that's where all the Star Wars testing was being done. If you think about how the Scud missile program was defined, it was a smaller version technology of the Star Wars program, where we used to shoot missiles out from Vandenberg Air Force Base out into space just to see if we could hit a target. And so I spent 3.5 years in the South Pacific watching missiles get shot within miles of me from Vandenberg. And I knew then that I had a passion for the federal sector. Fast forward, when I first left that first contract in the early 90s, I relocated to Las Vegas and essentially started the transition to start to work on government contracts. And I never left that sector until coming over to Blueprint. So I've spent time working with all the large federal agencies, from NASA to Homeland Security to Department of Interior, Hoover Dam. And where I see some of the differences, actually, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the U.S. government has been collecting data on everything from auto safety to weather to crime for decades, and now what they used to have was a bunch of files and a bunch of paperwork and a bunch of boxes and file drawers. And now what they have is what we call data. So even if it's in a file cabinet or a file drawer, we call it now disparate data. My belief is that the world has changed, and if you don't understand what role technology is going to play, you're probably going to be left behind. The days are gone, Gary, where you used to have people who didn't have access to technology. Now everybody has access to it. There's no longer that excuse built in. And it actually doesn't matter whether you're talking commercial or federal now. And one of the adjustments that the federal agencies have been making is they're starting to understand, in some cases, our large partners, like you mentioned Microsoft earlier, they just do it better. So doing it the old archaic way that the government always did it, those systems just won't keep up with the way the rest of the world is moving. So if they don't make those adjustments, I see so many efforts now for the federal space to actually start to converge and commingle a little better. And it's still a long way to go, because they're actually the last ones to the program, because the system was so old and large and vast. And it's just hard to get people conditioned to do things a little different. And I think that's what I like most about us. We're big enough to help our small business partners, Gary, but we're also small enough to still be agile. And I like that lane that we're in right now. I think that covers my personal experience and certainly what I view as the efforts that the government is actually making to make that transition. So this is where I normally would say, Ivan, am I leaving anything out?
No, I think you're spot on. I'll just dial in a little bit on kind of innovation in the federal space. I think a lot of us on this webinar have seen federal R&D contracts that go for 5 years and don't spit anything out productive at the far end. It's frustrating from a taxpayer's perspective. It's frustrating from a user's perspective. Wearing the uniform. And what is it that's different about this in the commercial space now? I feel like one of the things that has me most excited about Blueprint is this idea that we can come in and we can give you, a 60, a 90-day contract that has good deliverables at the end. We will give you a working, functioning product that uses your data, that has a back end and a front end component, and that fits the need of that prototyping process. And that's really what our commercial customers have driven us to. They've said, these big companies don't want to take large IT contracts that are viewed as risky. They want us to help them de-risk those contracts. They say, hey, you show us what this can look like and why we should choose this path for the technology and take us down this prototyping path. And then we'll go step by step with you. And I feel like that's a big difference from the federal space. The federal space used to say, oh, okay, we need to build this huge monolithic system. We'll give you 5 years of funding and we'll touch base with you every year. And it's a big change now. So this idea that we can come in and help realize value for agencies, for contractors quickly, I think is important to key in on. And how does that translate in the space? I think some of this is us working directly with agencies and saying, okay, here's a niche problem that we can help. And I think a lot of this is us working with that partner network, X, and you talked about this. It's our partner network saying, hey, we've got a program. And as a part of the next version of this contract, the program needs to not only continue doing what it's doing, but the government also wants to move it to the cloud or modernize a certain component of it or add a certain capability. And that may be a swim lane that our partner network isn't as comfortable. How do we move it to the cloud? Do we lift and shift? Do we refactor? If we're going to add this new capability, what's the most efficient way to do it? What tools can we use that mitigate the risk, that are proven, that aren't going to go out of style in a couple of years? So understanding that and kind of bringing that process, and I know Gary's going to go into detail about our innovation process later on, but having a repeatable process that we can bring, regardless of who the customer is, regardless of what their technical current state is, and then iterating on it. I think it's, we don't want to go down the path of being unsuccessful after a long multi-year contract, right? We need to hit the point of failure quickly and say, hey, this is an insurmountable challenge, or we need to redevelop these criteria, or be successful and give our customer that clear path to what a long-term pipeline looks like. I hope that kind of came across.
It did. Well, Gary, you've been teed up for the innovation. Would you like to kick that off? I know we had talked about doing something with Nash. And,
yeah, and there's to Xavier and Ivan's point, and then there was a question earlier around how do you ensure safety and security. What I have learned on the commercial side is that speed matters. Believe it or not, a lot of the problems that Ivan and Xavier discussed in terms of what the federal government goes through in getting things done, those actually also exist on the commercial side. Granted, they happen at a shorter cadence per se. On the federal side, they tend to happen much longer. But the need for moving faster with focus and intention is really, really, really important, especially on the innovation side of the house. And Ivan spoke about kind of approach in our methodology. And so we do, it's our approach is called facilitate innovation. And what it does is it takes a lot of how commercial products are built but it also takes the very best of other approaches like agile and human-centered design, and it brings it all together into a methodology that pushes things forward. And so to illustrate that, earlier I had talked about Reflect, and we presented this at Ignite. Fast forward a little bit, and we got approached to essentially put together a concept for the National Geospatial Agency and find a way to integrate video analytics into the existing workflow of the intelligence analyst. It wasn't about the fact that they didn't understand the power or potential of video, but integrating it into their workflow, it was slow. And so as a result, they would just, speed matters. And so video would just kind of get pushed aside. And so as we got into this and we kicked this off, all we knew or all we were given was there was a very particular technology stack to work with, and it needed to involve video analytics. That's literally all we had. And so typically something like this for a number of companies, it can run for years as, you go from stakeholder to stakeholder, group to group, and all these different activities occur. We didn't have that kind of time. We had 60 days, 60 calendar days at that. And so through facilitated innovation, what we did is we built Nash, which I will show you now. And I'll give a really quick high-level overview of Nash. But with Nash, it wasn't just about video analytics. We wanted to do something different. And so we imagined what would happen if you had this intelligence analyst and you paired them up with a data scientist. What type of interesting conversations would they have? What type of analysis would they do? And the intention of Nash is not to remove the need for the analyst. It's meant to augment their existing workflow and be part of their toolkit. And so to kind of show, what I'll do is I'll load up one of the sample ones. We'll go with this one. So here you're looking at a video. So traffic intersection, first and foremost, you'll notice that Nash is identifying cars over time. But within the midst of that, it's also identifying events and behaviors exhibited by those objects. And then it's detecting anomalies based over time of the events and behaviors exhibited by those objects. And then finally, one of the things we wanted to do with Nash was, okay, if I'm watching this, can you show me other areas of interest that match the events and behaviors and anomalies shown here, which is what this does here. And so there's all this interesting analysis that you can do on videos. And we wanted to make it, again, going back to what happens when we pair that analyst with a data scientist. These are all the different changes and things that can be done to the analysis. So as you start to understand the analysis you want to do from the events and behaviors, you can actually adjust and rerun the analysis whenever you want, which in and of itself was really cool. And all of this is wonderful. But another one of the things that was just, for me, was great about Nash is that we also put together and showcase an entire video processing pipeline in the cloud. And so what this does is it puts processing time in the hands of the agency themselves. So every step of the way, we've split up the pipeline. So along the way, you can see how long it takes things to process and all along these different batches and things like that. And what that means is if you need the analysis done faster, without having to do anything here, you can just scale up the cloud infrastructure itself independently of this, and Nash handles the rest of it for you. So it's that core promise of the cloud, right, where you can infinitely scale for performance. And it was one of those amazing things. And as we were building this out for the NGA, and again, all of this was done in 60 days. And not only did we build this and deliver it, we also submitted it to the Azure Marketplace. So it's actually available right now. You can go and download it for free, try it out. And then we're actually going to be speaking about this again at the Data and AI Summit tomorrow. So if you want to learn more about Nash, you can check that out. But going back to Ivan's point, this is from our best practices, from our approach, and the way that we've kind of attacked the commercial space, and taking that and refining it for use in the federal space has been a big focus of ours. And so now Ivan and Xavier are going to kind of talk about how we can help and assist in the win process for these opportunities.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition. So we all know that the federal procurement process is very different from the commercial space, right? Everybody who's on this webinar understands that, you know, if you're purely a commercial company, the barrier to entry in that federal space is substantial. Not only is the process very different, but a lot of times the tools that these agencies are using aren't cutting edge, right? I mean, we've seen coding languages that are 30 and 40 years old. And if you're being asked to come into a project and you don't necessarily understand some of those agency-specific criteria, you can be in trouble from the start. So I think the first thing is that, you know, because we have had experience in the federal space, we're comfortable not only with the process of what it takes to look at these bids, to assist our primes with them, to work with the agencies on them, but then we understand that, like with every project, one of the first stages in any opportunity is going in with that customer and really saying, okay, what's your current state? What's your existing tech? You know, because a lot of times the bids that they're submitting don't really capture all the information that you need to understand to be successful. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I'll just kind of walk through. I'm just going to kind of walk through some of these processes. So on the screen real quick, you see the government's typical contracting process. And I'll kind of talk through each stage in terms of how Blueprint works with our partners to make sure we're successful. Because anytime we're looking at all of these different opportunities, obviously depending on the stage, our partners are asking us for different things. So in the pre-solicitation stage is where we're trying to understand the broad scope of the problem. Folks are coming to us and saying, hey, we have a potential program that involves this component. Can you help us? So how we determine that internally is Xavier and I work with our tech teams to say, is this a problem that we think we can add value on? What are the broad sort of 30,000 foot view issues that we might run into? How do we look at this from a process perspective? How do you look to identify your potential resources and costs? And that's about the limit of the information we need. We help bring that information to light, either in an RFI response, in an unsolicited white paper, in a number of ways that it's kind of that high level. Once the solicitation's on the ground, we need to provide a lot more timely and specific details to our partner network. So that's when people are saying, okay, we have 30 days to turn around a 20, 50, 100-page proposal that involves all of these different moving pieces. For us to be successful, we need you to fit within our timeline. And we understand that. So a big piece of what we do is we help to manage the internal federal procurement process for Blueprint, which is identifying the resources that we need to bring in at each of those different gated events, resourcing them, making sure that the information we're providing is in the right format, is sufficient for our partner network, and really adds value. So, you know, a lot of the times the government will say, okay, you know, you, the contractor, shall provide X, Y, or Z. And we don't just want to say, okay, we'll provide it. We want to say, not only are we going to provide it, here's why we're doing what we're doing, and here's the advantage to you of our approach. This is what's different about how we modernize your applications or develop UI and UX. Here's what's different about the process, the people we involve, the cost, the timeline. All of those things are differentiators that we have to help to understand or to quantify as a part of that proposal process. Once we've submitted the bid, we all know that we're not off the hook at that point. A lot of times the government's going to come back and they're going to have questions. They're going to say, help us understand why you took this piece and answered it the way you did. Help us understand why this timeline accounts for certain risk factors. So that EN process, clarifying answers for the government is absolutely something we have to not only do, but do quickly. And working with that partner network, make sure that we don't lose sight of those bids even after they've been submitted and are doing the long 6-8 month wait period, not losing track of it. And then of course there's the award process itself, where the government says, okay, we had this long evaluation, you win, congratulations, you have 30 days to get started. And this goes back to Xavier's point, I think, which is we're not a small company. We have the ability to scale up to projects that are as large as required in the federal space. And that's an understanding of where can we staff people, internationally, of course, right? So, you have potential analysts, you have potential data scientists that are in any number of bases or locations, domestically and internationally, and having a partner that can help to scale to meet those needs is important. So this was a kind of a long-winded way of saying we understand the space, but we also understand, again, like I said, that you can't necessarily bring every best commercial practice into the federal space. You really have to go in with that open mind and say, okay, we think we'll do it this way, but here's the questions to make sure that we understand that we're not going to hit a friction point with this agency, right? Are they playing with all the same tools we need them to be playing with? Are they ready to adapt X, Y, and Z? They might have licensing agreements that we have to use as a part of our solution. So understanding all of those pieces. And then the last thing I'll kind of talk about, and one of the big differences, I think, from what I've seen in the federal space versus the commercial space, when we talk about all of those siloed information sources, in the federal space, those are typically managed by individual companies. So a lot of times you'll work with an agency and they'll have 15, 20, 30 different programs that are all managed by individual companies. So anytime that agency is looking to do any sort of broad modernization or transition, it's not just the challenge of dealing with all of those different information sources. It's how do you successfully bring all of these product owners along for the ride? And how do you make sure that they're invested and committed to it? Because that's not something that we typically see in the commercial sector, right? So, companies typically own the majority of their data and they don't have 30 different folks managing it. So it's certainly a nuance, and kind of understanding that and being able to deal with it is important. I think I'll pause there. X.
I have a great point. I think the only thing I would add is in certain sections, I'm thinking retail. Retail, you find that sometimes they do use a lot of third parties, which is kind of like the same conglomerate that we deal with in the federal space. When we walk into those contracts where the contracting officer says you're going to be working with this company. In the retail sector, you do see some common ground there. A lot of times you'll see someone having a third party store the data offshore or not even having control of their own data. The government, I think the variable there is the government usually doesn't like their data to go outside of the house, even if a third party is watching it indoors. So it's an interesting segue. I want to make sure that we leave some time for some of the questions, but also want to make sure we add the types of teaming partners that we're looking for, what we're looking for them to also bring to the table, being that their capabilities, their past performance, their agency knowledge, their technical certifications, and a real understanding of the federal acquisition process that Ivan has dove into extensively today. We understand that we bring a lot to the table, and when we're looking for teaming partners, it's similar to our approach to how we find our tech partners. It's a very thorough process for us, and we want to make sure we're a good partner as well. So we bring those same things with us. Ruthie, did we have any questions that we want to start taking before we sign off?
Yeah, awesome. I have a couple questions in the Q&A section, but a quick reminder to everyone listening in, if you do have some questions, please add it to the Q&A section. So the first one, I know Gary slightly touched on this, but if you'd like to go more in depth, that'd be awesome. So this question says, with the ongoing security hacks on our country's infrastructure, such as oil and gas, water systems, etc., how will the federal space sync with private companies to ensure we are safe and secure?
Gary.
That is such a beautiful question. And it has always been a question, I think, that's existed way back decades ago when it seemed that the commercial space and the federal space were really intertwined. Like, go all the way back to say like Bell Labs, which I'm such a huge fan of. They did so many amazing things. But I think what we're finding is there was this period of time where that conversation, for lack of a better word, between the federal government and the commercial space, they stopped dating. They broke up and they went their separate ways. And so now it's coming back to the table. And I think we're starting to see some of that. You're seeing on the federal side, new and different contracting vehicles coming out, ways of getting to, commercial entities, for example, like DIU is a really great example of an organization that's looking to bridge that gap. But you've also got commercial companies who are starting to understand that what they're doing and the impact it can have on national security. So, for example, some of you may have seen, Microsoft, and they're delivering their IVAR. I think it's IVARs. There's so many acronyms that gets used, but basically the HoloLens for use by the military. And so you're seeing the conversations now happening more and more, which is awesome. And what it's going to require, though, is, my belief is that the federal government is truly understanding that they've got to do things differently. On the commercial side, we have to do a much better job at understanding and meeting the federal government where they are, versus trying to come in with that sort of attitude like, oh, well, you're going to do it my way. Like, no, it's not going to work that way. And being able to adapt to that. And that's really what it's going to come down to. I don't know that the question around, from a security perspective, I think it's the responsibility of all of us. In that regard, is yes, we look to the federal government for those things, but I think it's going to take on the commercial side to get involved as well and be open to that. And that can mean a lot of different things. But even at Blueprint, we have this, very much, Ruthie will appreciate this reference, better together. And it's very much the exact same concept. And it sounds simple. And it is, but when you're dealing with years and years and years of breakup, right? Like, it takes time. And so maybe it's a touch of diplomacy, maybe, I don't know. But I'm personally seeing a lot of changes happening on the federal side as a means of bringing the commercial space back into it.
Yeah, Gary, I think you just hit it out of the park. I do. When I first started, I talked about how the government wants to bring intelligence to solutions and systems throughout DoD. I think the federal space is going to become the leader again. As I mentioned earlier, they've got the biggest wallet, and typically the commercial space follows right behind. In this particular example, though, the reason we're on this call today, the federal government is actually behind the commercial space. There's no disputing it. And if the federal government is behind the federal space, they're going to have to continue to understand that I wish I had a better way of saying we're just smarter at technology than the federal government. That's probably the wrong way to approach it, but it's just a fact of knowledge. This is what we do. The federal government itself is disparate. We're not disparate. We focus on a few core areas and competencies in this space, and we're really good at it. And the government has, everything, like I said earlier, they've got to track data for weather. They've got to track data for automobile safety. They've got to track data for crime. We don't have to save the world. We're just trying to save the world through technology. So, probably not the best way to end that, but I like the natural flow now. I do.
Awesome. That actually is kind of a great segue into the next question. That says the federal space covers so much. Do you guys cover it all, or do you target specific sectors or industries within the federal space?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I'll probably start with this one. I was just going to say that, I don't think we target everything. I think we really try to stay in the areas that we feel like we add the most value. So if I go back to what we started the conversation with, anything data related, whether it's backend, whether it's using AI and ML for data analysis or really developing front end. It's data related, and you need help developing something, you need help iterating on a current product or building something from scratch, I think we're interested. I know that there are a lot of federal contracts and services that are outside of that. So I think as an initial statement, and I know X and Gary can jump in, but I think we can work with any government agency, whether it's DoD, whether it's any federal agency out there. But I think we're really trying to stay in the niche areas of data and innovation.
That's it, Alvin. I don't think we're agency specific. As a matter of fact, I know we're not agency specific. We've looked at opportunities from everything from DoD to State Department to Homeland Security to NASA. Just in the short time I've been here, but there's a common ground. It's data related. It's dashboards. It's innovation. It's AI. It's ML. So I think that's the easier answer for us. I think even for us on the commercial side, we're digital transformation specialists. So we focus on a number of different sectors in this space. We're not trying to bring all of those sectors to the federal sector. So.
Excellent, thank you. So our next question we actually got through the chat, and this one says, sounds like Blueprint is doing some exciting stuff. What's the best way to get in contact with you and learn more? So the easiest way to get connected with us is just by connecting through our website. You can also, that's bpcs.com. You can also email us at info@bpcs.com. Or you can connect with all of our panelists on LinkedIn, send us a quick message. We'd love to chat. I know all three of these guys are just love talking about this stuff. So if you just want to chat and see what cool, innovative stuff Blueprint is doing within the federal sector, just connect with any of them on LinkedIn, and we'd love to get the conversation going. But I don't see any further questions, so we can go ahead and wrap things up. But I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists for taking your time to chat with us today and give some great insights to our audience. And thank you to our audience for checking in. And no matter where you're hopping in from, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter, Facebook, or even directly on Zoom, we just want to say thank you so much. We have a bunch of webinars lined up, and we will be adding them on our website as time goes on. But the next one to keep an eye out for is in June. As Gary also mentioned, we have 2 Blueprinters speaking at the Data and AI Summit hosted by Databricks, which they're speaking tomorrow, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and Gary will be speaking in the afternoon. So please join us and listen in on that awesome conversation. But thank you all for joining, and we hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.